College Football Nerds here talking top 10. We got a little late start to this week, so recaps are not so fun after you've had a few days to digest it from everybody else. And y'all have been asking for a top 10, so we do nothing if not give the people what they want. And that's what we're going to do right now. I've got my nerd pirate Josh with me. We are going to do this, and I'm not going to promise anything fast because, this is how we get to talk ball and make everybody here listening to us mad at some point in this discussion. Josh, you give your 10, I'll give my 10, and then we'll defend ourselves.
So, yeah, top 10, always a fun topic every year, and no matter what we say, somebody's going to be mad. But we'll go ahead and roll with it. So my top 10 right now, and for those that haven't heard us talk about this in the past, we sort of base this on a combination, if you will, of power ratings and resume. How would you do against someone else's schedule if you traded places? Meaning, if I took your schedule and you took mine, how would we do relative to each other? And we kind of, in my brain, that's how I compare teams, right? So it's a combination of, yes, your win-loss record. If you lose to Florida State, you lost to Florida State. I kind of assume you do every time. But at the same time, just because you're 7-0, if you've got a bunch of narrow wins, I don't assume you're going to beat 4 ranked teams in a row. My top 10, number 1, Ohio State. Number 2, Texas A&M. Number 3, Indiana. Number 4, Alabama. Number 5, Oregon. Number 6, Georgia. Number 7, Vanderbilt. Number 8, Ole Miss. Number 9, Miami. Number 10, Georgia Tech.
All right, for mine, which is actually a little bit different than yours, which will be fun, I've got Ohio State number 1, Indiana number 2, Georgia number 3, Texas A&M number 4, Alabama number 5. At 6, I've got Ole Miss, 7 BYU, 8 Notre Dame, 9 Texas Tech, 10 Miami. Josh, can I explain Georgia? So I agree with your philosophy as well, and I posted this tweet out earlier this week that got a ton of traffic, and I just said, can you make a case for why A&M isn't ranked number 1? And then beneath that, I said, and I didn't even say A&M should be ranked number 1. Beneath that, I said I've got A&M probably ranked number 1 if we're just doing pure rankings, but power rated Ohio State number 1, who I think would be favored over everybody in the country, and I think that's reasonable. When I look at Georgia, I see, I think about last year, Alabama beat Georgia. This year, Alabama beat Georgia. But Kalen DeBoer does this thing where he ambushes teams with the very best that he's got to throw at them. He throws all of it at one team 1 year. It's what it feels like. He did that against Oregon, too, when he was at Washington. And so I think if you look at the comparisons of who Alabama has been down the stretch, and I will defend their win against South Carolina, too, I think Georgia is an excellent team. I think they've shown that they can put points on the board. Quarterback was a concern. I think they've shown at times that they can be a good defensive team, although they've taken a step back. But I have my questions, Josh, about A&M. We've seen them capable of blowing LSU out, which they were capable of doing that last year, but also not being able to put away an Auburn, who does have a good defense. So on one side, they can't score against Auburn. On the other side, they're giving up, 43, 42 against Arkansas. And so those two things give me pause if I'm leaning more towards power rating than I am towards ranking.
Okay. I think I sort of follow that, but, the thing that gets me, Daniel, is you still put Georgia ahead of Alabama. So you got Georgia with a loss, ahead of Alabama with a loss, and then Texas A&M undefeated between them. So is your view that the loss to Florida State is worse than Georgia's loss to Alabama, or does the head-to-head overcome it? And I especially ask this because, to date, Alabama's schedule has been a lot harder than Texas A&M and Georgia. And so even knowing Alabama clearly has the worst loss of the 3 teams, there's not really any way to debate that. Worst loss in Ole Miss too. Why do you put Alabama 3rd out of 4 out of Georgia, Texas A&M, Alabama, Ole Miss, given the resume of wins between the 4?
So what I like to do with every team is look at the whole resume, and I do tend to wait, or I can throw stuff out. Like I really don't care about the Florida State loss at this point. I don't care. except for some of what we saw against Florida State came back against South Carolina. Now, I am willing to forgive a lot of that because it's a road game. I think that we dismissed South Carolina because they were 3-4 and Alabama played them, but they lost to number 7 and number 18. And they lost a game to LSU, who has also lost a couple of games to top 10 teams. So, 3-4 when you've played 5 ranked teams or 4 ranked teams, and a couple of them are in the top 10, versus 3-4 when you haven't played any ranked teams is a whole different ballgame. So I give them credit for that. But their inability to put teams away is a concern for me. Their inability to run the ball is a concern for me. I have a ton of respect for what they've done in this grind as it relates to being a playoff worthy resume. But as it relates to saying, how would Georgia do with this schedule? How would Texas A&M do with this schedule? I'm not as convinced that they wouldn't have found a way to really put one of those teams away in that stretch, because at this point, if you notice, I don't have Vanderbilt in my top 10. I'm not as impressed with them. They couldn't put away Missouri without their quarterback. I'm not super impressed with Tennessee, though I do think they're a good team. So at this point, Alabama has proven that they can beat a lot of good teams in a row, but I think they have some holes that have me concerned if they play a really good team other than Georgia, of course.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I disagree in a couple levels. One of which, like in our metrics and other metrics, like at Georgia's 12th, Alabama's 13th. One thing I'll say, Daniel, is I have my own concerns about Georgia. I mean, Georgia's defense is not, it's not, historical Georgia elite defensive team. They gave up 35 to Ole Miss. Looked like they were going to lose that game of their own accord. I flagged in the Alabama-Georgia preview what I'd seen on film, which is that I thought they had major issues in the secondary. I think that's clearly panning out. I mean, if you watch Georgia play, they've had issues with pass defense. And one of the big things that's changed is they've made some personnel changes in the secondary because I think the coaches recognize that they don't have the personnel they want to have in place. And the other side of it is I don't think Georgia's offense is necessarily any better, if as good. Georgia has a better run game than Alabama, but they certainly, I don't think, have as good a passing game. Not to say that they're not decently good. I think Gunnar Stockton has been a reasonably good quarterback. Injuries at wide receivers limited them, but more than anything, they just don't have the skill position talent that Alabama has at the wide receiver position. I mean, Ohio State's really the only team that can make an argument, I think, that they would have or might have a better wide receiving room than Alabama right now. And so I think when you put those two together, it's hard for me, given that Alabama beat Georgia, to put Alabama behind them. Now, it gets tricky, like you kind of noted with Ole Miss. I mean, Ole Miss has played LSU. That was a close win. Arkansas was a close win. Kentucky was a close win. Georgia, they came, kind of came up and then faded late. Georgia won that game. Georgia's been a second-half team all year. And then, again, a fairly close win over Oklahoma. I think Ole Miss is a team that deserves to be ranked high because they've won those games. But from like a power rating perspective, it's a little skittish. I mean, it makes sense they're 16th in our ranking behind Alabama, who's 13th. And so for me, it's pretty clear that I want to put Alabama and then Georgia and then Ole Miss. And Daniel, the one that you don't really have in that set, and the one you don't have in your top 10, but I have pretty high, is Vandy. And the reason I do that is, when you talk Vanderbilt played LSU, and they beat LSU in a game that was close, but no closer than Ole Miss did. They beat Missouri, who's probably I don't know where Missouri and Oklahoma line up versus each other, but I think it's a similar quality win. Vanderbilt stomped South Carolina. Their one big blemish is they lost fairly badly to Alabama, but that 30-14 score is really deceptive. That game, we both have talked about, was a lot closer than that. I think Vanderbilt's the one that gets somewhat disrespected in all this. I mean, in our 1 through 136 power rating for all its, good and ill, and bear in mind our power rating, collegefootballnerds.com, we take every team, we simulate them against everyone else. And bear in mind, we don't use prior, so there's no recruiting rankings, there's nothing that's biasing the SEC or biasing what Vanderbilt was the year prior. And because of that, it thinks Vanderbilt is the highest quality team in the SEC. So just based on resume, based on just overall quality, what they do if you trade schedules, I mean, I think Vanderbilt's the team that gets disrespected the most. I would put Vanderbilt ahead of Ole Miss based almost just on resume, but also on the fact that I think they're a better team right now.
Can I give you a counterpoint to that? So Vanderbilt can't help this, but it also informs on game situation. Two of their best wins, I think South Carolina is one of their better wins because of margin. So if you just look at who you beat in margin, South Carolina and Missouri. South Carolina was without Sellers for most of that game, and it was a tight game before Sellers got hurt, and he was throwing for like 11 and a half yards an attempt before that. So he goes out. They ended up going big. They beat Missouri by 7 points, and Bo Prabula got hurt on that goal line stop. That's where he broke his ankle. He gets in there. Like, that's the difference in the game. Like, they won by 7 points, and they didn't get in on that 1 yard line. And then they had to play a backup quarterback in just quickly, throw him out there, and he wasn't great for the rest of the game. So from that standpoint, I think that, if we look at just who they beat, I would agree with you. But if you look at the actual game scenarios, I have my concerns there just because they've gotten, I don't want to say lucky, but because they took those guys out, they played the game right. But I have my concerns because they won those two big games with backup quarterbacks.
I mean, that's fair enough. I mean, the backup quarterback point is fair enough, but again, we start getting a little academic at that point, I think, in how much you're going to punish teams based on injuries and everything else. So let's do it. Let's turn now to the other side of the argument, which is it's funny that everybody calls us Big Ten haters or points out the fact that we were an SEC channel forever, etc. I'm going to take some heat for putting A&M ahead of Indiana, but we do have the Big Ten pretty high on the list. I mean, both of us agree that Ohio State is the best team, and I'll say my point here before we turn into a conversation maybe about A&M, the Big Ten as a whole, and some of these remaining teams. I think Ohio State is the best team by far because of the level of dominance they're showing. I mean, in our model, Ohio State isn't just the number one team. Ohio State's the number one team by like as big a margin. If you look at number one Ohio State versus number 10 Texas A&M, it's about the same as Texas A&M to like Auburn, like 10 to 35. That's the gap. They've been dominant in basically every game but the opener against Texas. I give a lot of teams leeway when it's your first start with a new quarterback. The same way I give Ohio State leeway for that game against Texas. It's the only reason I give Alabama a lot of leeway for the Florida State game. I don't think there's any way Alabama loses to Florida State today, even with the South Carolina kind of near debacle from them. They got beat pretty bad by Florida State. I don't think offensively and defensively they're really capable of doing that anymore. It was a team that wasn't ready to play week one, had a new quarterback. In retrospect, you look at that game, Florida State defensively hasn't been very good through the course of the year. Alabama probably should have scored 40 points. In the same way, I don't know that Ohio State doesn't score 30 points on Texas right now. That's the point to me. And when you throw that data point out there, Ohio State has just flat dominated everyone. Now, the competition level has not been particularly good. It's just not. In terms of top 40 teams in our rating system, you get Texas and you get Washington, and that's it. And as we often talk about, if you're not the top 40 team, you're generally probably not capable of really beating an elite team. And those are really, it's not quite true anymore with the changes in the clock rules and football, but that's generally the sort of gist of it. Ohio State hasn't been playing those games. But if you look around the landscape of college football, Daniel, there's not anybody else that's going and thumping Washington, thumping Illinois, thumping Wisconsin week after week after week with really no hiccups, total consistency. We have them the number one scoring defense in the country, number 2 pass defense, number 11 rush defense, and their top 15 passing offense, top 30 rush offense. They are a complete football team in the way that I think absolutely nobody else is. We can maybe have a discussion in a minute about Indiana and some of these other teams, but they've played a couple good teams, looked very good in those games, and otherwise dominated. To me, it's pretty clear that Ohio State is the number one team in the country.
I agree they're number one. Just, I think two things are possibly going on with Ohio State. One, their defense is who they are, and they're phenomenal. I said this earlier today. I pulled out some numbers just to show in terms of relative performance what Ohio State is doing is really impressive because we say this all the time when we talk about opponent adjusted numbers and how you did against a team versus how everybody else did. If that team sucks offensively, it's hard to hold them to less than suck to get those percentage averages really down there. Ohio State is holding their opponents to 75% below their average, which is really impressive. But like other things like single digits against running yards per carry and things like that. So that's impressive. And I have them number one. When I think about Ohio State in the playoffs, I have two concerns. One, if you look at Ohio State's schedule, they've got two teams that are probably top 25 caliber, and neither one of them are top 10 caliber in Washington and Michigan. The rest of it is really bad. That's not their fault. I think Texas is decent, and like you, I'm a little frustrated with SEC fans that want to discount the Texas game, but also want to discount the Alabama loss. You can't do both. I think the argument is valid. You don't have tape on Arch Manning. You don't know what the new personnel and defense is going to look like, and you're protecting your guy who's got his first start as well. I don't ding them for Texas, but if you take their schedule as a whole, it's like two games, and they around those two games. So Washington, you've got Ohio on one side and Minnesota on the other. Those are two trash teams, and people are going to come at me and say Minnesota's really good. They lost 41-3 to Iowa Saturday, and Cal beat them by two scores. So no, Minnesota's not a good team. That's not Ohio State's fault. And then you go down to Illinois, they're sandwiched between Minnesota and Wisconsin. And then you go down to Michigan, and before them, there's Rutgers. So for me, there's a concern there when you have to beat multiple teams in a row and you haven't really played anybody great yet. They haven't played anybody great yet. They won't play anybody great until the Big Ten championship game. The other concern that is in the back of my head, and I'm willing to say this is probably just because Ohio State is going for game control, not for blowouts. They don't need to blow everybody out. But I will say, every single team on this list that they've beaten and blown out has been beaten as bad or worse by someone else or has a G5 loss to Ball State. Like everybody on the list. Everybody on this list is getting blown out by Iowa or, Iowa again. So Wisconsin, Minnesota. Illinois got crushed by Indiana. So that in the back of my head a little bit, because it's like, yes, they're blowing teams out that are getting blown out by other teams that aren't number one in the country. Does that give you pause at all?
So, Daniel, there's two sides to that coin to me. And the main side to me, as we say all the time, used to say with Clemson and some of those teams, if you're routinely blowing out bad teams, it usually means you're an elite team. Because if you're merely a good team, you rarely play bad teams and give them their worst loss every single time. And Ohio State isn't necessarily giving every team their worst loss, to your point. Basically, all these teams are losing worse or slightly worse to somebody else. But the fact that Ohio State is in the ballpark of their worst loss every time consistently for every team they're playing says a lot, right? I mean, most teams can't do that. And we often say when you're trying to evaluate a team from a projection standpoint, if you're trying to evaluate Ohio State or Texas A&M or Alabama, it is almost always a mistake to refer to the best game they played or the worst. Alabama is not the team that played Florida State or the team that played probably Georgia every week, right? That's not really Alabama on average. Indiana is not the team that beat Illinois and probably not the team that narrowly beat Iowa in a given week. And so, when you're talking Ohio State, the crazy thing is, yeah, okay, they may not have been the worst week for their opponents, but they were the second worst week every time. And to be able to do that on a consistent basis starts to mean, yeah, Ohio State kind of is that team. Like, it's not, this isn't the outlier game for them. This is the consistent game for them. The problem, though, Daniel, really is, when we start getting into the overall quality perspective, of these teams, because when we talk about like top 40 teams in our metrics, Alabama, it's not just the fact that they ran through 4 ranked teams in a row. It's what they've played like 5 top 25 teams in our metric. Florida State's 26th in our power rating. And people can make fun of that because of their record, but they've generally played teams close when they've lost. The Stanford loss was baffling. Now, they've had a clear qualitative decline is the thing that I think people have to appreciate, because this was a team that came back against Miami, and you felt like if that game went on another quarter, might have had a shot. I mean, the Virginia loss was a bad loss, but they were highly competitive. Virginia's not a terrible team. And the team that beats Alabama is close with Miami, narrowly loses to Virginia. Just a team that narrowly loses to Virginia should not lose to Stanford. And so they're a team that's fallen way off. But even then, overall in the season, they're like 26. Daniel, again, Ohio State's only played 2 of those teams. And this really gets into the inherent problem of the quality in the bottom half of the Big Ten is so bad. And the Big Ten is so big now, and the schedule's so split up, that we're only getting a couple meaningful data points. I mean, I think you raised this point a minute ago when we were talking before the show. I mean, there's a chance that Big Ten may only have 2 or 3 more ranked games the entire rest of the season, in the bottom third of the season. That's crazy. And it doesn't mean at all that Ohio State or Indiana or Oregon is a bad team. The problem is you've got the 4 or 5 top teams of the Big Ten. They're going to play, 1 or 2 games against each other, period? When, I mean, theoretically, they could have, 12? It's just the schedules are so separated that, 1, it's hard to evaluate them against each other. But 2, it also means from a qualitative analytics standpoint, we really can't evaluate against anybody else within their own conference or external to the conference.
Yeah, and I agree with what you said about Ohio State. I was playing a little bit of devil's advocate. I wanted to throw that out there. But those are the things that are in the back of my mind that are concerning talking points come playoff time. It's not for right now. But the point is fair. And I think the stat that I gave you was Ohio State's opponents combined are 2-8 versus Power 4 teams outside the conference. And they have 4 G4 losses, G5 losses, whatever it is. That's not great. And so I don't necessarily disagree with Big Ten fans that say that preseason rankings artificially influence the polls now and some SEC teams are overrated. I don't necessarily disagree with that. So I say let's take, we don't have to just look at top 25 or like how many ranked teams did you beat. How did the teams that you played, because to your point, it's hard within the Big Ten. And a lot of this has nothing to do with like, oh, you're dodging this team or that team. It's your conference is so big, y'all don't play each other. That is the suit's fault. That's not Ohio State and Oregon's fault. They probably want to play each other, but they don't. And so Ohio State doesn't get to play games that they would probably win. It's really interesting to me, and that brings me to Oregon, and I'll love you to talk about Oregon too. Oregon's opponents that they've beaten are combined 4-27 against Power 4 teams. That's terrible. So what I say is let's take top 25 wins off the board or whatever, that not make that the sole focus. Make your case for Oregon that doesn't include preseason rankings. This is not a pro SEC take. You saw that I had Vanderbilt out of my top 10. Make your case for Oregon, because if you strip the logo off, just like we say we need to do for SEC teams all the time, again, I'm not arguing with that. How do you make your case for Oregon, whose wins are 4-27 against Power 4 teams? They had a ugly win against a Wisconsin team that everybody's blowing out. They had 13 offensive points against Indiana. They had 17 offensive points against Penn State. Josh, I have concerns about Oregon.
I do too. Now, I mean, I have them 5th, and I thought people might riot. You don't have them in your top 10.
Correct.
I don't know that I'm that low or quote unquote low on them, but it is. I mean, it is highly problematic. Now they're playing at Iowa on November 8th. I don't know if we will or won't do a preview of that game, but I'll go ahead and tee up from this video. I mean, there's already warning signs here because I do think Iowa is a sneakily good top 25 level team. I don't think Oregon's beaten anybody that good. I mean, again, when you accept the fact that Penn State, like in our system, they're 34th, Penn State's just not a good team. Like Penn State and Clemson, it's not that they were teams that weren't made out, weren't who they were supposed to be, and they struggled early and they faded. Penn State and Clemson are just flat out not good. They have been consistently not good from the start to the end of the year. I'm not making excuses for Alabama, genuinely not when I talk about Florida State. I was just trying to make the point like, hey, they played with Miami. They played with at least a Virginia team that's relatively good. Penn State really hadn't done that. I mean, they've been the same team the whole season. And that's kind of damning, right? I mean, so when you consider that, then that close game between Oregon and Penn State, I mean, you can talk about it being, a big hyped up game and it was tough because of that, but I also don't know that it means that much. And to your point, in our metrics, I mean, they're, eighth in scoring offense, seventh in or sixth in scoring defense, opponent adjusted. The problem with Oregon is the same problem we flagged with them in 4 years. They annihilate lesser competition and kind of like run up their statistics. To some degree, I think they run up the score almost intentionally. But like 56-10 over Rutgers, 34-14 over Northwestern in a game that was in some ways harder than that. 41-7 over Oregon State, 69-3 over Oklahoma State, which might well be the worst team in P4 right now, honestly. But when you run through it, those games are why they're statistically so high. I mean, if you were to sort this out and just look at Indiana and Penn State and Wisconsin, I mean, to your point, Daniel, they were no way really offensively at least dominant in those football games. Let's talk about like Dante Moore in those games. All respect to the kid. He got hurt in that Wisconsin game. I hate it for him. No matter, what happens in a game, I never want to see any kid get hurt. I never want to see any kid get knocked out of a game. But that said, we've got to talk about the performance. 5.7 yards per attempt against Wisconsin, Daniel. 5.5 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 2 picks against Indiana. Penn State, 6.4 yards per attempt. Had 3 touchdowns, but again, didn't throw for 7 yards per attempt. The 3 meaningful teams Oregon has played, in none of those games did Dante Moore even get 6.5 yards per attempt. And 7.5 is the mark we say for just competent. 8.5 is good. Like, there is a lot of reason to question Oregon as a darling that exists because their statistics, when they've played lesser competition, they've beaten them so badly that it's kind of inflated their overall stats. Because when they've played better competition, it has not scaled at all. And that, it's not unreasonable to think with a loss that maybe Oregon shouldn't be even in a top 10, frankly. And again, people will get upset with that, but why? I don't know that I can say they're going to beat Miami. Certainly don't know that I can say they're going to beat Texas Tech. Notre Dame has 2 losses, which people are going to scream over, but Notre Dame has played a harder schedule for those 2 losses. So, I don't know what Oregon is. And, I don't know that we will know. I mean, I think Iowa, USC, and Washington, Daniel, are probably going to tell us a lot. But Oregon is really the biggest issue to me in the entire Big Ten. But if you look at that, then it starts to poison the conversation about Indiana. And then that really leaves Ohio State in an island in the Big Ten, not really through the fault of any of these teams, but just merely from the fact that, again, we don't see Oregon play Michigan. We don't see Oregon play Ohio State. It's so hard to evaluate these teams with so few connected data points.
Yeah, and I think you've got a little more data that's interesting about all the conferences that we can close out with. But before we do, I want to talk about Texas Tech because I don't think you had them, and they were a hot story for a while. They haven't played a tough schedule, but they have annihilated people. They lost a close game to Arizona State without their quarterback, and that's the one area that you always say, and I agree, you're willing to somewhat forgive a loss in a situation where you don't have your quarterback. They won without their quarterback last week, and he's coming back. I've got him at 9. What about that do you think that you would revisit that in a couple of weeks, or are there other bad things you've seen from Texas Tech that have them out of your top 10 other than just the quarterback?
I mean, the problem with Texas Tech is how do you evaluate, the loss with losing a quarterback to Arizona State? And we talk about a lot, right? Like, I'm very forgiving anytime a team loses a starting quarterback, and either during the game or immediately before the game. The problem is with that loss and with the rest of the schedule, Daniel, like you have Georgia Tech on there. It's hard for me to rank Texas Tech ahead of a Georgia Tech team that hasn't lost, right? Like it's just hard for me because the schedule is very weak. I mean, the Utah win is the big win. And FPI right now, I mean, Utah is the highest rated team, which is kind of an interesting thing in and of itself. But the Big 12 is probably the weakest conference. Um, and so, you know, I really, really struggled with it because Texas Tech has a lot. Again, they're dominating lesser competition. They've dominated even good competition. You know, like the Utah game. Now that was deceptive because they scored 24 points in the fourth quarter. It's deceptive, not deceptive, right? But that was, that was a game that was like 10. That was 10-3 start of the fourth quarter, and then Texas Tech kind of ran away with it late in the game for a variety of issues. But their competition level is so low in the Big 12, and they don't really, they don't play anybody out of conference to really prove anything. It makes it tough. And the other team that I'll lump in there is Georgia Tech. And now this is an interesting thing from our power ratings perspective and a lot of power ratings perspective. We have Georgia Tech 25th. If you look at most power ratings, Georgia Tech, like Florida State and Auburn, are all like the same team or pass each other back and forth. I mean, Georgia Tech in particular, they're undefeated. I feel like I have to reward them of that. But again, if you accept the fact that Clemson is not a good team, and they're flat out not, they're probably not a top 30 team, 24-21 over Clemson is not a good deal. Narrow win over Colorado, not a good deal. 1-point win over Wake Forest in a game that maybe shouldn't have won, not a good deal. Duke was not a blowout. They blew out Syracuse, but Syracuse at this point has quarterback issues and imploded. They've had a very weak schedule to date. Very weak schedule to date, Daniel. I don't believe they've played a top 30 team. And they have a number of close wins. I mean, I'm almost talking myself into the fact that I really should have ranked Texas Tech ahead of Georgia Tech, except the fact that Georgia Tech's at least undefeated, and I have to give some amount of credit to it because Texas Tech found a way to lose. But those two teams, to me, Daniel, are really problematic. And with both of them, with the schedules being what they are, I feel like I really have to punish them for a loss, which Texas Tech had. And in the same way, I'm putting Georgia Tech in my top 10. I've already said that it's kind of absurd they're a top 10 team, and yet I did it, partly because I'm not sure what else to do. But I will say, Daniel, I mean, if they lose to Pitt or, lose to Pitt in Georgia and they finish 10-2, honestly, I'm not sure that they're even really, when you compare them to the Big Ten and SEC teams that are like 9-3 or 8-4, I don't know that a 10-2 Georgia Tech should really be ranked ahead of an 8-4, 9-3 SEC or Big Ten team. And people are going to be up in arms about it, but that's just the reality of the schedule. And not just the schedule, but the way in which Georgia Tech has played to date against the caliber of teams they have played.
Might I offer you a better, more viable candidate for your 10th spot in Notre Dame?
Yeah, I mean, I'll hear it. I mean, Notre Dame, we said this at the time with 2 losses. People hate on Notre Dame. They want to see Notre Dame be low. Notre Dame beating USC is a big deal because USC is actually pretty darn good this year. Destroying Arkansas is a big deal. And they have 2 extremely narrow losses to very good teams in Miami and Texas A&M. I can buy it, Daniel. I mean, I'm a little more even than you, I think, prone to say 2 losses has to matter. But Notre Dame is a really, really darn good team. And I think people want to discount them because they lost 2 games. But they lost 2 games to Miami and Texas A&M teams that both have a good shot of winning their conferences. And Notre Dame could have easily won either game, which means to me Notre Dame could have easily won the ACC or the SEC.
Yeah. I like Notre Dame. I am very much of the opinion you lose by 3 to number 8 and you lose by 1 to now number 3. That doesn't mean you can't be number 10. Right. And that one of those was on the road. So to open the season, and it was CJ Carr's first game ever. He did struggle against USC, though, in that 10-point win. All right, Josh, you want to close us out with some other conference thoughts, and we'll wrap it up?
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to show, and we'll throw a bar graph off, and I'm not going to pretend I put tons of effort into making it pretty. But I just wanted to show FPI ratings. I know everybody hates on FPI, but bear with me. It's not really about FPI or their particular methodologies. They have a numerical power rating for teams. Our methodology with wins and losses really doesn't have a numerical rating. Even though you could kind of use wins for it, it doesn't quite work for a variety of reasons. So I needed something that had a numerical rating. And what I really wanted to talk about is the difficulties that come into analytics when teams are this siloed schedule wise. I mean, we've talked a little bit in this video about how, particularly in the Big Ten, you've got like the top 7 teams, I think combined have like one Power 5 out of conference win. Is that right, Daniel? With Ohio State over Texas. Michigan lost to Oklahoma. Oregon and Indiana don't play a Power 5 or haven't yet. Iowa lost to Iowa State. USC lost to Notre Dame. Minnesota lost to Cal. And that's just like taking standings, right? When you're talking about Big Ten standings, you don't have the top teams like Oregon and Indiana losing out of conference, but what you don't really have is any connective tissue, right? You have a narrow win of Ohio State over Texas, which we've already talked about how I don't take too much out of that, but it's a total silo. There is nothing connecting the entire half of the top of the Big Ten to relate them to the ACC, the SEC, or the Big 12. It doesn't exist. The top 5 teams in the Big 12 only have one Power 5 win out of conference themselves. The top 5 in the ACC, I think, are currently 0-4 versus Power 4 teams out of conferences, with losses to like West Virginia, Baylor, TCU. It doesn't even count a loss to Tulane. So when you look at all that, you kind of end up in this weird situation where everybody can make fun of everybody else's out of conference losses, in part because so many of the top teams didn't play out of conference. And so you can make fun of Alabama losing to Florida State, but you have to ignore the fact that Oregon and Indiana didn't play anybody out of conference, right? Well, ultimately what I'm trying to get to here is this creates a mathematical problem because we don't have enough relational data between the conferences. And really what ends up happening when these conferences don't play each other and you have a numerical system like FBI, well, when you do FBI ratings and you talk about FBI's quality, FBI in particular is EPA based. People make fun of FBI, but at the same time, the same people that love EPA, which I do think is actually a very good stat from a modeling perspective, because it's situational, yardage based, potential scoring stat. FBI is highly EPA based, and now it's opponent adjusted in terms of trying to account for the fact that you played better or worse teams. We could have a much longer discussion how effective that is with EPA for a variety of reasons. Same reason our model struggles with it. But when you have silos, if you had, let's say, 30 teams in football that only played each other and 30 teams in football that only played each other, mathematically, the yardage, scoring, everything that happens within those 30 teams has no effect on each other. You could take one set of 30 teams, take them out of the rating entirely, and it probably would not even touch the FPI ratings of the remaining teams. And the problem with that is that there's really no relational comparison between the sets, meaning the best team and the worst team in a given set are really being ranked relative to each other. The Ohio State's really being ranked relative to the worst team in the Big Ten at this point based on the connective tissue within the Big Ten that's played out. The best team and the worst team in the SEC are being ranked relative to each other within that set based on their own connective tissue. They're not really mathematically being ranked versus each other because the relational data doesn't exist. Now, the reason people don't like FBI is that it brings in priors, particularly it uses recruiting rankings, prior year results. They've done a little bit more with some of this in SP Plus to try to weight it from out-of-conference games. I'll tell you, our model underneath the hood, we have a whole system that tries to pull in out-of-conference results to normalize our rankings is how we do it. So we don't use priors, but we actually do use in-conference, out-of-conference results and use that to bias the entire system. You've got to do something, but the way the FBI works, it's mainly based on priors. And what you can see here in this chart is just a graph of the actual FBI ratings of every team in each conference. SEC, Big 10, ACC, Big 12. The thing I want you to take away from this is how darn similar the lines actually are, right? I mean, there's different distributions. You can tell the Big Ten is more top-heavy. The slant is significantly more pronounced than the SEC. But compare like the SEC and the ACC. Look at how similar those lines are. Even the majority of like the SEC to the Big 12 are pretty similar. So there's a notable thing that the Big Ten is significantly more top-heavy. The Big 12 is more top-heavy, and the bottom is really bad. Oklahoma State, we're all staring at you right now. But more than anything, what I want you to note is really what you see are 4 lines of pretty similar distributions that are honestly probably separated the way they are mainly based on the recruiting rankings and the prior expectations of the relative conferences. And so it's actually hugely problematic because when you talk about how good the SEC is or how good the Big Ten is and Ohio State versus Auburn versus whoever, I'm not sure that really means anything, one conference versus the other. Because I think the bottom of the SEC in some ways is buoyed because the top of the SEC is pulled down. But the related point to that is Indiana, Oregon, the top of the Big Ten that's so highly rated, may be pushed up because the bottom of the Big Ten is pulled down. And again, the whole thing is kind of tilted around a median axle, if that makes sense. Like there's a median point for all these lines that's in a narrow line, and it's just about whether how much or not the given conference is tilted top heavy or not top heavy related around that point. So I don't know if this is useful for people to understand when we kind of complain about metrics and relational stuff. I think all these computer rankings and metrics in our model are very useful as the season goes on because the vast majority of games, in fact, almost all of them, are intra-conference games. SEC versus SEC, Big Ten versus Big Ten. This problem does not affect that because these systems model really well within the data set that's all connected, which is within the conference. Where I think we have a problem is when we start to try to use this to say, oh, well, the top of the Big Ten is a lot better than the best SEC teams, but the bottom half of the big SEC, they're way better than the bottom of the Big Ten. I don't know that that's fair based on ratings. I just don't on either side. And we're probably going to end up seeing the playoff committee look at the FPI ratings and SP ratings to say, oh, Indiana and Oregon, they got to be at the top because look how much higher rated they are than the SEC teams. Oh, but man, Alabama's schedule is so much more brutal than this Big Ten schedule because they got so many more top 40 rated teams. And, you know, even being analytics guy, you guys know we're honest, and I've got to be honest. I don't know based on the data we have that we can trust these numbers at all when we're comparing one conference to another. I just don't. And I wanted to put it in a chart so you could kind of see that I think the reality is we've created really good systems for comparing conference teams versus one another. And beyond that, when comparing when you're comparing one conference of teams into a different conference, I hate to say it, but we may be just looking at eye test and purely anecdotal data. And, you know, that leads to some great conversations and, 45-minute videos from us. But unfortunately, it's not great for the real analytical health of the sport or even having a firm answer of things. And the reality is also we're going to get into the playoff, and you may have a situation like last year where Ohio State goes rampant and you say the SEC sucks. And I don't even know if that's indicative of anything other than Ohio State's the best team in the country. And even if Indiana and Oregon are very good, I don't know if that means anything for this is the SEC or the Big Ten because we know that the Big Ten is at least very top heavy. That much we do know because we know the comparative difference between the top and bottom teams. But how much does that top heaviness mean the bottom of the Big Ten's bad? We don't know that answer. So yeah, long rant, Daniel, but I think it's a pretty notable thing. And, this is simple chart, I think, kind of helps to demonstrate the fact that, we don't know what we don't know. And that really these systems are all just kind of independently modeling the conferences and then slapping them on top of each other based on recruiting rankings and telling us it makes sense.
Well, I just think the lack of external data points makes things really hard. When Indiana was not anything in the Big Ten, them not playing anybody out of conference wouldn't have mattered. But when you have an expectation of playoffs and you have an expectation of carrying the water for a conference in terms of understanding relative quality, and you don't play anybody out of conference, and Penn State, who was supposed to be that for them, doesn't play anybody out of conference. Ole Miss doesn't get off easy because they're in the SEC. They're the one in the SEC that didn't play anybody out of conference. That makes things hard, and I think there is an unnoticed feature here in that I think there's 7 Big Ten teams that don't play anybody out of conference, a Power 4 team. I think there's a similar number in the Big 12. When you don't play anybody out of conference, when your team does lose, that means they're losing to someone else in conference. That means they're giving that win to someone else in conference. That means if you lose, you might get knocked out of the playoffs, but it might elevate somebody else into the playoffs because they didn't play anybody out of conference either. So it's just a net positive for the conference. but it makes it impossibly hard to judge externally and kind of necessitates this expanded playoff that I don't really love. All right, y'all, this was a super long one, but I had a lot of fun. This might be our best video of the year so far. Let us know in the comments, do you prefer recap discussion or do you prefer top 10 discussion? And maybe we'll take you up on what you think. And be happy and feel free to post your top 10 in the comments and we'll mix it up with you down there. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week and God bless.